Women's emotional intelligence and progressivism is overemphasized. Emotional intelligence and progressivism, ignoring men's emotional intelligence and progressivism. Men's emotional intelligence and progressivism outweighs women's, e.g., emotional regulation. Distinguishing subjective feelings versus objective facts matters because responses to those feelings shape policy and real-world outcomes globally. First, the claim that women have more emotional intelligence on average relies on settled facts, but fails due to research being mixed and heavily dependent on what you measure. The result is some studies show small average differences in specific emotional skills like emotion recognition. For example, emotional intelligence itself is a contested concept with multiple definitions, not a single measurable trait. It assumes differences in emotional intelligence, creating a false dichotomy. A better view is there are variations in emotional intelligence. Therefore, men and women overlap in emotional intelligence instead of divide on it. Second, the claim that men are trained to bottle up emotions, so they lack emotional intelligence relies on leaping from different expression norms to lower emotional intelligence, but fails due to research on emotional regulation, distinguishing between suppression, reappraisal, and awareness. The result is suppressing expression is not the same as lacking emotional understanding. For example, boys are often discouraged from expressing vulnerability. That assumes boys are discouraged from understanding emotions, creating a false sense of emotional intelligence on one side. A better view is suppressing emotional vulnerability is due to a form of emotional intelligence. Therefore, men's emotional intelligence is a balance more than a difference. Third, the claim that emotional intelligence determines political ideology relies on many factors, but fails due to shaky reasoning. The result is political ideology relies on personality traits like openness to experience. For example, education, economic conditions, cultural identity, geography, and media ecosystems. It assumes political identities are purely emotional, creating an excuse to dismiss men's opinions. A better view is men have different experiences that shape their opinions. Therefore, political ideology might be to make peace with emotional intelligence rather than have a conflict with it. Fourth, the claim that negative emotions are misattributed to immigrants, feminism, etc. against economic stress relies on framing political disagreement as psychological misfiring, but fails due to culturally driven values about identity, tradition, and change over economic stress. The result is misattribution happens sometimes, but this framing is overly one-directional. For example, reducing disagreement to, "men just can't regulate emotions," is more of a rhetorical dismissal than an explanation. It assumes men just feel bad and target the wrong thing, creating a straw man of how men express emotions. A better view is men get emotionally lost in hard economic times, which makes them more vulnerable to political misattribution. Therefore, men are as much of a target as anyone else but more utilized. Fifth, the claim that anti-gay and anti-trans views come from an inability to regulate disgust relies on moral and cultural complexity, but fails due to oversimplification. The result is disgust sensitivity does correlate with some social attitudes. For example, beliefs about norms, religion, authority, and social cohesion. It assumes failed emotional regulation, creating a deflection rather than a solution. A better view is that such men are misguided. Therefore, if you're going to assume something clinical, help them rather than dismiss them. And sixth, the overall structural problem relies on shifting between different claims, but fails due to over-analysis. The result is connecting things that aren't intrinsically connected. For example, descriptive psychology, developmental socialization, and normative political judgment. It assumes how emotions are processed and how boys and girls are raised can determine which ideology is correct, creating a scapegoat out of men. Therefore, you're the problem rather than the solution. To conclude, a single theory explanation fails given the multi-variable system and human ideology despite many behave the same way toward other targets in the same situations because lots of interacting forces are the most reasonable interpretations, the overall conclusion holds true.